There's a big melting, boiling pot within the construction industry of issues. There's no one silver bullet that's going to sort it.
82% of builders or people within the construction will experience mental health problems.
It's sad because it doesn't shock me. I was born in Ellesmere, being raised by my mum, my two sisters. My dad was a soldier. He served in the Falklands. He served in Northern Ireland. I've never known my dad without PTSD. Very early on, we moved from Ellesmere Port down to Aldershot. And then from Aldershot, I moved to Northern Ireland, which in the 80s was not the greatest place for the son of an English soldier that was then placed in a Catholic school outside of the barracks. When we'd come back to the car, my job was to drop down, look under the car and look for an explosive attached to the bottom of the car.
I didn't know half of that.
No, I was never instinctively a resilient kid. I was built over years. He said something along the lines of, you know what, Nathan, sooner or later you're just going to have to lose that rather big chip off your shoulder. When you have an emotional reaction to something that people say to you, probably because it's true.
You travelled with your missus, you've become a father, you've pursued a dream, been a leader within construction.
I see myself as a coach. 99% of our workforce is men. So if you want to see how male society is getting on, you look at the construction industry and you'll see how we're performing. And it's not great. Site manager is the second most stressful job to do in the world, behind stockbroker. Construction is a great barometer. It's that canary in the mines, isn't it? And right now that canary is sounding. The world can be such a horrible place at times that it just needs somebody to be, you know, nice and kind. You know, and I think there's part of me that just wants to be that kind person.
Hello, I'm Ed and I'd like to welcome you to our podcast series, Tackling It Together, brought to you by Little Blackbird, where we will be having open, honest and important conversations with some inspirational guests. Welcome to the Little Blackbird Tackling It Together podcast. So we've got Nath here today, the angry Jack Russell. So Nathan, I'm excited about this conversation. I reached out to you a few weeks ago and said, do you fancy it? And you said yes. Well, I think you delayed for a while. And then I sent you another message and you said yes. Bit of context, so we're back here at Chester Rugby Club where you played here for how many years?
I started at this club when I was 12. So yeah, I had a period of being travelling and when I was out injured and then playing at Ellesmere Port, but yeah, this has always been my club. So yeah, for a long, long time. I actually started playing at this club at the same year that I met my missus.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
How does it feel coming back? You were here a couple of weeks ago watching the game, but...
Yeah. I again, with many things, I have a lot of mixed emotions. This club has been part of my life for so long, and there's so many highs and so many lows around this club. I've never known a club as well as I know this club, and I am always anxious about walking through that gate. I literally will sit there for days before, and like coming to the game here was like when I'd have like a social event here. I would be anxious for days because I'm not very good in social events, and I would always be anxious about my interactions with people who I'd talk to, what I'd say, would I make myself look stupid, would I be in with the cool gang like you and Marcus, would I be, could I make people laugh like Marcus could. Yeah, not like you, but like Marcus could. Yeah, I always had those anxieties, and that this club has always represented that to me. But it's always had those highs that, you know, when you had your good days and you won a game, like people would be patting you on the back. You'd feel almost like king of the world at times. But then I'd go away, do training Tuesday, Thursday, and then I'd be anxious again about a game on a Saturday. You know, and after the games, I used to love coming here because you'd finish a game and you come. That's the great thing about rugby, isn't it? You finish a game and you're in with the supporters. You're mixing in, you're having a beer with people, and they're coming up and talking to you. And I was always anxious around those conversations because people had talked to me like they knew me, and they probably did, but playing in the front row, you get so many bangs on your head, you can just about remember your own name, never mind who's talking to you. And there's still people, like the other week I came in and people were coming up to me going, "Hey Nathan, great to see you." And I recognise their face, but I just can't remember names. And I'm just like, oh God, what am I going to do? What am I going to say? You know, can't remember the name, how embarrassing is that? And I'll leave away with this whole sense of anxiety about how should I have interacted better? What should I have done better? And people probably think I'm ignorant, probably think that I'm, somebody that just wants to, get away or doesn't like them. It couldn't be further from the truth. I love interacting with people, but I'm just so crap at it.
Yeah, but you're probably a bit similar to me. You overthink stuff a lot.
Yeah.
Probably go into your own head.
Yeah.
That's maybe why that game was such a good fit for you and me, probably, because and how many, when we look around at all these pictures, how many of us do we think actually that was a good fit because we could externalise, we can vent stuff.
Yeah. And that was the thing, isn't it? When you're in a team, in a group of, no matter what the social environment brought about, whenever you got to the training paddock, whenever you got into a game, it didn't matter where everybody had come from. It's that whole, you could have a bricklayer or you could have a barrister in a team. It didn't matter where you come from.
More barristers in this club than bricklayers.
100% there is, yeah. There's not many bricklayers in this club. What bricklayers we do have are great though. But yeah, it didn't matter about that environment because you're always, just after that, as soon as that whistle went, all of that went out the window, didn't it? And that was the great leveller. I was never a kid who was educated, and certainly coming from this club, coming through the youth ranks, you knew about people who, I don't want to say posh, but people who were well off and people who had, a better life than I had at that time, and the club was very much around the politics as a youth club growing up at that stage. It's not like it is nowadays. And you always felt, and certainly I felt, I had a chip on my shoulder and I had to prove stuff. And so when I came the other week and met up with my mate who I haven't seen, Mike Turnbull, Mike was very close to me as a kid growing up, and we grew very close to each other growing up, and Mike was really good, and he's always been that one person I know in my life, apart from my wife and my dad, that if I needed to be grounded and I needed that honest conversation, Mike would be the guy to go to. And I hate him for his honesty, but he is a barrister. Well, as such, he works in insurance, but I'll say barrister because it sounds better, doesn't it? But I was travelling the world with the wife, and I met Mike in Bangkok.
Oh, here you go.
This is the clean version, mate, yeah. So I was with my wife in Bangkok with Mike, and I think everything of my upbringing and everything almost kind of came out, and I can't remember the whole conversation, but the context was around, how it was all right for him, but not for me. And I'd been the one who'd instigated that. And he said something along the lines of, you know what, Nathan, sooner or later, you're just going to have to lose that rather fucking big chip off your shoulder. And it hurt so much, mate. Honestly, it was such a horrible, like in front of my wife as well, I was so embarrassed and it was so emotional, the feeling that I had. And one of the things I've learned is when you have an emotional reaction to something that people say to you, it's probably because it's true. And Mike was absolutely spot on, and it was true. I had this big chip on my shoulder, which had probably presented itself quite a few times in this club, which is why I think a lot of people probably didn't warm to me and still struggle to warm to me, because I was this kid with a chip on my shoulder, always having something to prove, and it come from that context of always looking at people who had what I didn't, and why did they have what I didn't, and I didn't get it. But then when I go out there, we were all just completely level, and that for me, being out there was great, because I could go and pick on, certainly as a kid, I could go and pick on the barrister's son and just give him a good shoeing. And
Can't do that these days.
Yeah. Who's privileged now, son? And it's just,
Hi-ho!
Honestly, Mike was
We are
great
talking
at that.
about instant equality on that grass.
Yeah.
Instant equality.
Yeah. As soon as that whistle went,
talent.
it didn't matter who your dad was. It didn't matter what they did as a living. My dad was a soldier and a freaking dustbin man. Right, and a bloody good bloke as well, like just a great man. But he didn't have that standing in society, didn't he? He wasn't a barrister, he wasn't formally educated at a university, he was a hard grafting man, same as my mum, a hard grafting woman that was brought up, having to work hard for every little penny that they had. And that's one of the things they taught me was the hard work, but soon as I went out there and that whistle went, it didn't matter who my parents were or what money we had or what we didn't have. What mattered was how well we played out there, and yeah, that was a great leveler, great little equaliser. You know, brought everybody on the same level. And as you realise as you get older and you get into the senior and the men's rugby, you know, it doesn't really matter either way. Even when you're in here in the bar afterwards, you know, you start to realise it doesn't really matter where I come from. You know, people don't really care, you know, what you've got or what you haven't got. It's about your personality, isn't it? About how you. But I still struggle with that today, you know, because in my head it's always there, that anxiety about coming around and am I interacting properly? Am I behaving in the right way in a social event? And that probably comes from the neurodiverse nature that I have. And yeah, it's really difficult to read social situations as well.
Well, I know we were saying, and this isn't, you know, if you think back to that, that's part of the reason I wanted to have this conversation with you today. One, because if I was to pinpoint people who I've known in my life from a rugby or just a life in general, who would epitomise the word resilience, you'd pop into that.
Yeah.
Partly because of what you were saying out there, but I was talking to you before and I was saying a few of the lads last December, we caught up for a pint and someone asked a random question, who's the toughest rugby player you'd ever played with, but also a bloody good bloke, and your name popped up a couple of times. I think I started it.
After a few beers.
After a few beers. Arsehole, it popped up a few times. But no, you immediately popped into my mind. I would say you were one of the most resilient people on that pitch. And when I say resilient, a thing that I identified as a Cumbrian lad coming here at 18 years of age from a very working class town, Workington. You're from Ellesmere Port, very similar. Very similar, just different areas, a lot of industry being ripped out of it and people just keeping their heads above water. But when I came to play for this club, I identified very early on that when the games got tough, some people went missing. They would slide to the back or they'd just maybe implode a little bit. But you were one of those lads that when the games got tough, you thrived.
Yeah.
You laughed, you enjoyed it, you liked the niggle, you liked the conflict. It seemed to light a fuse in you. Yeah. There was a couple of others in there, but you always pinged out in my mind. I want to know where that comes from, because that was very different to how people normally operated here.
Yeah.
And for me, that's resilience. And now you're going to give us a perspective of that, but you have also put yourself in the stretch zone doing this. You mentioned before about neurodiverse, and this isn't an easy environment for you.
No.
You've done bloody well in life. You've went back to school, you went back to uni, you got your degree, you're now a senior site manager. Everything that you're going to say from the construction world is your point of view.
Yeah.
Nothing with regards to your employer, it's just your perspective on things.
Yeah.
And you're a massive advocate for mental health and particularly men's mental health.
Yeah.
So that's why I've got you on. Also, I haven't seen you in a good few years, so it's nice to catch up with you.
But I remember you when you were there, mate. I looked at your website before, and I looked at the picture on the website, and I thought to myself, "Wow, is still the same, still the same age."
That's me. I was like Ace Ventura when we were playing out there.
You might have to update that photo.
Yeah. So moving on. So you said yes. Why did you say yes? And where does that passion for mental health and males' mental health come from for you?
Yeah. There's a lot of questions in all of that, but why did I say yes? Well, fundamentally because of you, and because of who you are and the relationship I have with you, and seeing what you do at this stage with regards to mental health, and particularly men's mental health, which is it's a topic that I feel that I'm connected to, not just because I'm a man, and not just because of the industry that I work in construction, but because of the upbringing that I had, which was, strangely quite female orientated, being raised by my mum, my two sisters. My dad was a soldier, so always away on exercise and not getting the amount of time with me as a kid growing up, and seeing the mental health issues that my dad has suffered as a soldier. So it's a subject that I feel that I'm quite closely connected to, and seeing what you do, is something that I feel inspired by, and certainly seeing some of the characters that you've had on here that I know, like Sir Joe Leask and that, and I thought, yeah, well, if those guys are going to offer up an opportunity and there's something I could do, then I want to take it. This is me completely out of my comfort zone. I hate being in the limelight. I hate bright lights. I hate electrical sounds. It's just
everything that we've put
just
in
so,
front of you
yeah,
today.
Everything that's in front of me right now, it just so overloads my brain, and yeah, it can come out in different ways, like aggression, frustration. So if I do get angry and break your equipment, I'm sorry.
Well, bear in mind, you know I'm from Cumbria, so I'm quite handy in a tight spot. So Jake behind the camera, this could go off. Yeah. But
yeah, so that was my inspiration to come around, is just to be part of the conversation and try and keep it moving forward in both society and, you know, whatever context or form I can.
Also, though, you tap into something. This is a question I haven't asked you, but I've never. A lot of the mental health work that we do and well-being's a big thing for me because that comes before mental health. One of the big things I refer to as, it's like 4 spinning plates. One is your physical well-being, your mental well-being, your continuous learning and your connection. From when I've seen you here, playing rugby here, you travelled with your missus, you've become a father, you've went back to school and you've pursued a dream of being within the construction industry, being a leader within construction. You as an adult are constantly putting yourself in that stretch zone. We just talked there about suicide prevention training you went on with Papyrus. Really difficult training that most people don't choose to put themselves in. Yeah. Why is it important for you at this stage of your life to push yourself out your comfort zones?
I don't think it's important to me. That's one thing, is that on that, it's a good question. Why do you put yourself in a position to put yourself outside of your comfort zone? I don't do it consciously most of the time. I think it's a natural part of my brain. You know, we spoke earlier about neurodiversity, the ADHD and autism, so I've been assessed and I've got loads of them. And certainly there's part of my brain that just can't settle, it can't stay still. And, you know, if I go more than 5 days without hitting the gym or without doing some form of exercise, I become the most irritating person in the world. And quite often my wife will say to me, will you do me a favour and just go to the gym? Because I become this really irritating person and I do everything to annoy people, and so I've got to keep myself moving. And as you go through life, like you say, you know, from whatever it is, from education through to work and what have you, I think I'm at that stage in my life where really I can keep pushing myself down the education route, and I still do now. I'm actually doing a HND through work whilst working as well, and doing those other elements that I've developed over the years. But I think I'm at that point in my life where actually, where I really need to stretch, where my brain really needs to be pushed, and what will keep it active and keep it from getting dull and bored and irritable is the emotional side of my being. That is not something that I've ever tapped into. It's not something I've ever explored to a great extent. But I think there's kind of that an enlightenment moment maybe, where you get through to some part of your life where you can look back and reflect and see how you've behaved, and I see how I've behaved and trying to understand why I've done that, and then seeing the impact that I've had on other people's lives, because whether I mean to or not, I can be quite impactful on people in the way that I behave around them and interact with them. I don't think that's a conscious, it's just my behaviour is such as that, you know, I can be quite positive at times, and I can also be quite negative depending on the situation. None of it is done with any malice, but I seem to interact well with people at times, and you know, I can leave a bit of a footprint, and I'm at that age where I want that footprint to be positive, you know, and less of the negative as it's had in previous years. And I think understanding that is the only way that I will stretch myself because I don't understand it. I don't. We were saying before about well-being. You've got to be a specialist in that field because it's such a level of responsibility, and I'm in no way an expert on any of this. But I'm an expert on me. I'm an expert on what my behaviour has been, and I want to be able to understand that. And I think doing the likes of the mental health first aiders, the papyrus, suicide prevention, certainly in the industry that I work in, you know, as well as preparing me and giving me the tools to work within that environment, it's done a lot to help me understand me and my behaviours of the past, you know. And I think that's, you know, again, for the original question, why do I stretch myself? Why do I push myself through this? It's because my brain is like, it's just this itch. It won't let me stay still. It won't let me sit there and not do something. And it drives my wife insane. It does. Because, you know, we'll make plans and I'll say, let's do this. And, you know, I always say don't plan for anything. Have an idea. Because if you make a plan, it often falls to crap. You know, but have an idea of what you want to do and then try and work towards that. It'll take a bit of planning, but don't make a plan that's solid. Be adaptable. Have an idea. And my wife and I had been together for years, and I would always have these ideas, and that's when it started off. Well, you know, let's go travelling. We went travelling. Okay, let's go back to. I didn't want to come back. Let's settle in New Zealand. We were going to settle in New Zealand, but then we came back, and then it was like, let's go to university. Let's move to London. Let's move back up north, and now we're back up north. And going, well, what do we do now? Should we move house again? Should we go back down south? Should we do that? Yeah, my brain just constantly. It's like an itch. It is an itch, and it's really hard at times because, you know, sometimes the only way to deal with it is, you know, is either go to the gym, but there's only so many times you can go to the gym in the day. And then the other way that I deal with it and try and help calm that overactive side of it is to, I know this sounds a little bit wishy-washy or something, I don't know what the words are, but I pray. I'm not Christian, I'm agnostic, so I neither believe nor disbelieve in any religion, but I think religion's a really interesting subject. But it's like a meditation. You know, it's just taking that time just to calm my brain down, just to sit there. And the reason why it's kind of in my head is because I used to pray before every game in this club. And every time in there, 3 Hail Marys, 3 Our Fathers, right? And I was raised in a Catholic school. There's a history behind that, I'll let you know. But I don't have a faith. I admire people who have faiths. I think they're fantastic, but I don't have a faith. I believe I'm too logic, but I think there's a bit of logic in some faiths as well. But I'm too logical there's not enough answers there for me to be able to move forward with a faith. But I used to sit there and pray before every game, 3 Our Fathers, 3 Hail Marys. And the reason why I'd do that is that would settle my brain, because before a game, my brain would be like as if the Tasmanian devil was in there. I'd be overthinking line-out plays. I'd be thinking about the first move, from the kick-off. What if we catch it? What if the second row catches it? And I'd be playing over, and I could never shut my brain down. And then I'd just sit there and I'd say 3 prayers. And you'd say about one of the things you touched on before about, you know, some people would kind of fade when it got to that niggle or when, you know, it got real in a game, and I would come to the fore. One of the dark sides of my brain would be that I would sit there and I'd say the prayer, and I don't know how this is going to sound, but it's going to sound pretty dark. You know, after those prayers, at the end of it, I would sit there and almost say to God, yeah, because, you know, that was the only person how I could form in my head with a Christian upbringing, and it could be Allah, it could be anybody, but I would picture this God and I'd say, if today's the day I have to die on that pitch, then at least I'm going to die happy. And I know that sounds really dark, but when I'd go out on that pitch then and that whistle would go, I know at the back of my head would be, whatever it takes, just whatever it takes, don't step back. And that didn't come like that. That wasn't like a natural thing, like I was born this kid who would just put his body on the line and just go. That developed. I remember coming to this club at the age of 12, and I remember Simon Bowes, great player, and I'm sure he's linked to the club. I think it was my first training session, like an exocet missile, nailed me in this tackle. And honestly, as a 12-year-old kid, I couldn't stop crying. I was so hurt. I was in so much pain. And I used every excuse. Oh, it's my asthma, it's everything like that. And I remember my dad coming over and kneeling down next to me, and I'm thinking, oh, here's a bit of comfort. Here's a bit of comfort. My dad's going to look after me. And my dad knelt down to me and goes, I know why you're crying, son. And it's not because of your asthma. It's because he fucking hurt you, didn't it? Now you've got a choice. And he just got up and he went over and he walked over and sat on the second team pitch down the bottom there, and he just stood by the posts and looked at me. And at that point I had a choice, and I knew what he meant. I've got a choice. I either get up and carry on, or if I can just walk off. So I got up and I carried on. And you think that's great, but you know what happened?
Oh, did it again.
The very next move, like there's 20 odd kids in there, and you come around and I'm thinking there's no chance I'm going to get the same lad again, am I? And I come around and I see him line me up again, and I'm thinking, no, it's not going to happen. And I went for it. Exact same thing happened. Hit me like an exorcist mash out. Honestly, nearly tore me in two. But instead of my dad coming over to me, it was clear that I was injured. It was clear that I was hurt. You know, I was in a bit of pain, and there was a guy there who's linked to the club now who come over in front of me dad, because he was the coach, Jeff Burdett, and he come over and he put his arm and he's like, come on son, come on. And he just picked me over, walked me to the side, again, crying my eyes out. He goes, well done, well done. Now you take your time, and if you want to come back in, you come back in. But just a different way of saying to me, you've got a choice. Now my dad was the hard line, you've got a choice. And he was very honest with me. And Jeff was this kind of nurturing, that must have been really tough for you. That must have really hurt. It's your first time here, but don't worry about it. And I think the reason why Jeff did that is because Jeff headhunted me. He'd seen me play against his son, and he was the one who brought me to the club and said, I want you to come and play for us. And he could see it, and he was that nurturing. And I stuck with the club, and that's where I am now. And that kind of resilience that you see out there, I was never instinctively a resilient kid. That was built over years. That resilience to stay out there and just get pummeled was years and years of development. That was getting hit by Simon Bowes. That was getting, chunks bitten out of you by players, and it took years to develop that kind of what people see as a resilience. Because inside you're still that little 12-year-old boy who's scared of getting hit. But you know that you're going to get hit, and you've got a choice, and you can actually take it again, and I proved that.
What about outside of the pitch, looking back? What were the key moments in life that defined you and just enabled you to develop that resilience?
Yeah, there's a long story.
There's a few things that you
there's a long story. So resilience for me, where that comes from outside of the club, it's a tough subject, because as you can imagine, there's quite a lot of personal, emotional experiences that you go through that. And just to be clear, compared to the lads that I've seen on your podcasts, obviously it's personable to me, but what those lads have gone through, I am nowhere near that level. They are, I look at Joe and the lad that you had from the rugby club that was in Sandy Lane and had that decision to make, and that song come on, and I'm nowhere near that, and certainly not to the way I think of it. Those lads have really had a tough life. Mine come from an upbringing of just a hard life outside of rugby. My upbringing was, I was born in Ellesmere Port, but very early on, my dad was a soldier in the 80s. Very early on, we moved from Ellesmere Port down to Aldershot. So loss of friends, loss of relationships, and then that in itself, you develop a way of making new friends, interacting with people in a new setting, developing survival techniques, things that I've only learned that you do as a way of trauma, like being pulled away from relationships. It creates trauma. These are things that I've only recently learned about, and that happened, and it'd be the same for many army kids. You literally build relationships, and then 2 years later you moved on to the next camp in the next part of the world, and you've got a group of mates who are on the camp, but I was the only kid in my age really, and it was really difficult to make friends, and you get ripped away from them. And then from Aldershot I moved to Northern Ireland, which at the time in the 80s was not the greatest place for the son of a soldier. Certainly not the son of an English soldier that was then placed in a Catholic school outside of the barracks. The kids I went to school with were fantastic, absolutely fantastic. It was St Patrick's. It was on Our Lady Mile in a place called Hollywood in Northern Ireland. The Troubles were still going on, and I was the son of a Protestant soldier placed in a Catholic school right next to a high school, which was also a Catholic high school. And you can imagine people didn't look too kindly upon me being there. The kids I was in school with were fantastic, because as you are, you're 4 or 5 years of age, you don't know anything about the politics, the religion, and all those other things that are put out there as the reasons for the Troubles. But then the high school kids can just be horrible, can't they? You know, and I spent nearly 4 years over there, constantly getting bullied, constantly getting physically attacked by kids who just were doing what they were taught to do because their parents had brought them up in a certain way. And for those years, those formal, those years from the age of 5 to about 10 were a constant battle, and that built up this mental resilience of how to survive. In its same time, it obviously, it's not like beating a piece of metal. The more you beat a piece of metal, the harder it gets. That's not how it works with human beings. The more you beat it, sometimes it gets hard. Sometimes it actually gets a lot weaker as well. So there's elements of my resilience that are really strong, because I can deal with people who are aggressive and horrible and nasty, and I can be really patient in there because that's the way I was brought up. But then I can be quite weak in the I'm quite patient with people, I'm quite understanding with people, but I'm quite weak in social interactions, because it takes a long time for me to build that trust because of those relationships that I had as a kid. You'd think that, kids grow up, you just meet people and you become friends, and I can do that, but I can always initially meet that friendship and make that connection, but there's always this wall that builds up, and that has been there for many years, and it probably took me till I was in my 20s before I could start knocking that wall down. And I really struggled with the Irish and connecting with people because of my upbringing. It took me years to get over that. It took
defensive over that.
100%, yeah. Just naturally trying to be. I was hyper vigilant all the times. As a kid growing up, I don't know what it's like in Cumbria. I mean, I know it was rough, but when you'd go out to the shops with your dad in the car, my job when we'd go out to the shops off barracks and that, when we'd come back to the car, my job was to drop down, look under the car and look for an explosive attached to the bottom of the car. That's one of my things, is remembering my dad teaching me what a device looked like, because they had a book that they would teach you with, and because I was shorter and it was less obvious and I could get down, my two sisters were there, the first thing my dad would do is say to me, right, go on son, and I'd drop down as my dad would sit there, pretend to play with his, because he'd not even put his keys in the car, he'd just sit there jingling his keys and I'd be looking under the car. And that kind of upbringing, it's
a lot of responsibility for a kid, that.
Yeah, but you don't think about that as a kid, do you? But that just in its nature, then when you start to learn about why am I doing it, it's just one of those things that you did. You didn't realise why you were doing it. You didn't realise there was people out there that didn't like you and were trying to kill you or could potentially be that. But, when you get older and you start to realise that, it builds up a lot of distrust and mistrust in me around people from Ireland, which I know is 100% wrong, because, some of my fucking best friends now are Irish and they're really lovely people, but it was really hard to get over that barrier. And that, again, that in itself, getting over that barrier builds resilience. All those barriers that are put in your way, all those hurdles that you've got to try and get over, they build resilience, but it's not linear. They build resilience, but they also build weaknesses in you. One of the things we've spoken about was, where does that come from? Where does that resilience come from? And, fundamentally in my life, the men in my life have been quite important to that. My dad, he is a soldier. He served in the Falklands, he served in Northern Ireland, served in many conflicts, and I've never known my dad without PTSD. You know, he served in the Falklands when I was, you know, still in nappies and come back with PTSD. My mum says to this day, you know, sorry to me dad, but you know, I won't talk about it in too much because it's his story. But you know, my mum said he never quite came back the same person that he left, and he would tell you that himself. He would never tell you specifics, but you know, my dad has always suffered with PTSD, and I'd say complex PTSD because of his history of him growing up, and watching my dad deal with that has helped me almost from a standpoint where I can sit back and have watched that, been you know, exposed to it as well. But you can kind of see how he's had to deal with that, and obviously it puts a lot of traits into myself and how I behave, and learning and understanding that has helped me build resilience and understand why I behave the way I do and why those traits have come from my dad. So watching my dad has been great for helping me form in that understanding, but also the way that my dad would interact with me has helped me build resilience. You know, there's certain things that, you know, you look back in life and think I could have done that differently, I could have behaved differently, but it's come from that nurture part of you. My granddad, Cumbrian lad like yourself, from Rowra.
Rowra?
From Rowra, mate, yeah.
Bloody hell, used to go-karting there.
Yeah, around the racetrack, yeah, he lived around the corner from there. He wasn't well liked in those parts. He was a convicted armed robber.
I didn't know half of that.
No?
I didn't know you were in Ireland.
No?
And as you tell, that's the beautiful things of these conversations. I link that back to what I saw on the pitch, and it makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
When stuff got tough, you came, you know, you loved the niggle.
Oh, yeah.
And it was where you thrived, but it makes perfect sense from an early age that that defence was up and you had to fight and physically or, you know, emotionally protect yourself. But you mentioned something there around, because I want to get into your role now as a senior site manager. You know, construction's tough, a lot of pressure,
Yeah.
a lot of stress. You mentioned as a kid when you got poleaxed on that training field, there was two approaches you saw. You saw your dad, which is doing what he knew, was to give you that firm, stern approach.
Yeah.
And you had Jeff, who gave you a nurturing, give you that arm and give you the choice, give you a bit of praise.
Yeah.
As you've gone into your role as a leader in the construction world, which path have you gone down? That firm, stern path, or that nurturing leader?
Both. Yeah. And because it calls for both, you know, in the sense that construction is a highly hazardous environment. You know, there's no getting away from that, not in our way that we operate within the construction industry. I'm sure in, you know, a few hundred years or something we'll develop ways where it won't be so hazardous, but it is hazardous, and it requires a certain amount of discipline, and it requires a certain amount of sticking to the plan and sticking to the program and following what the book says. You know, you've got to do that. And unfortunately, the demands of the industry as they are now, they don't allow you all the time in the world to be able to do that coaching, that nurturing, and the industry is so adversarial that it's really hard to bring people along on that coaching and nurturing journey. It's such a transient industry. It doesn't allow itself to be that coaching and nurturing to many of the subcontractors and the contractors that we come to site. You do have opportunities where you can build relationships with them if you're stable enough in a region, in an area, that you can develop that with those subcontractors and your preferred partners. You can develop that, which is 100% my preferred nature. You know, coaching, nurturing, for me, that is more natural to me, and that comes probably from my mum and my sisters, from that kind of, you know, they would always care for you and put their arms around you when you're hurt. It's a, you know, it's a trait that my mum, my sisters very much displayed, is that, you know, on most cases, my sisters will tell you of stories where they weren't so nurturing, and I can tell you many a story where they weren't so nurturing. But my mum, again, nurturing, caring, but again, also had that stern line. And I prefer that because I think that it's got longevity in it. My dad's hard line, and don't get me wrong, my dad can also be that caring, nurturing, that person. Certainly as he's got older, he's softened. But I also think that his ability to be disciplined and be firm, fair, my dad was always, not always, that's wrong, he wasn't always fair, you need to admit that. That's not his fault, that was the way he was brought up, you know, that was as a result of his PTSD, but he was always firm, and on the whole, he was fair. There's a place for that. You've got to be firm and you've got to be fair, because it's too easy that you become ill-disciplined. You don't hold the line, and people get injured, and fatally injured, unfortunately. So it does require to be that firm person, to be that disciplined person, and be fair. But also, there's a lot of scope, especially with the male demographic that we have. 99% of our trades are men. Only 1%. There might be a marginal increase over the past few years to bring up the female demographic a little bit, but there's not much movement in it. There's a lot of drive towards changing that, but 99% of the trades are men, and they need that coach. They don't, you know, one of the things I hate about our industry, I find it, I understand the tool that we use and why we have this tool, and it's this yellow and red card system. It's like being out there on the pitch. It's a yellow and red card system. You know, you do something wrong, you get a yellow card. You do something wrong again, you get a red card, you're off the pitch. It's the same in construction. You do something wrong on the site, you get a warning. Unless it's something that's really bad and you instantly a red card, you're off site. Well, that works on an 80-minute game. Yeah, that because most people will be disciplined. You've already been taught, and you can work with that. But in the world of work, you know, and this goes down to why the mental health is probably an issue. You go into a construction industry and you say to a person who's working on hourly rate, dry liner for instance, and he's doing something wrong, and you give him a yellow card. Another manager walks in 2 days later, sees him doing something else wrong, gives him a yellow card. That's 2 yellow cards. He's got to go off the site. He's then lost his earnings. He's then lost his job, and potentially, you know, depending on how he is financially, he's lost his house. And if he's lost his house, has he lost his wife? Has he lost his kids? Because we have this yellow and red card system in the industry, and we've brought it in because it's efficient and we don't have the time to deal with things like that. But when we talk about why is mental health such an issue in construction, I'm not saying that's the only reason, but it certainly doesn't help. And I have real issues around that, because I don't see my job as a site manager is not as a referee. And dealing out those yellow and red cards puts me in the position as a referee. I don't see myself as that. I see myself as a coach. I see myself as someone there that's got to build a team, and with the direct employees that I have around me, I've got time around those teams, because I can nurture them, I can help them, I can guide them, I can be that coach. But on a site like now where I've got 150 people on site, well, I've got a team of 12 around me, so that's 12 people. That's like 1% of the site that I can coach and nurture. The rest are then subjected to this referee style of operating. And it must be really, I know, because I've been a tradesperson before, I've worked as a roofer out there, and it's so difficult. Back when I worked and the health and safety wasn't as great, but even nowadays, it must be so stressful for them. You know, that fear of if they do something wrong, they're going to get a yellow card. That fear of if they make one step wrong, they always feel like, you always feel like you're being watched. I'm sure that's the case, because we're always out and we're always got a presence on there. It must be really difficult for them to be able to operate in that system. I don't know what the answer is. I don't know if there's a better system out there, because that system is as a result of the pressures that we face. Like time is always critical. Everything's been, you know, finely tuned down and brought down to, you know, the finest of margins. You know, we operate on fine margins within the industry, where you know one simple delay can pretty much put companies into administration. But the margins are so tight. It's such a difficult industry to work with. You've got so many pressures of time. You've got so many pressures of getting the quality right, because you certainly don't want to have, you know, a building that you've built that goes as drastically wrong as Grenfell. All those pressures that build up, and then you've got this site manager or this person like myself that's operating this yellow and red card system. And I couldn't tell you the last time I dealt one out. I discipline people and I go through, but there's better ways of operating than that doesn't create that stress, that doesn't create that fear. You might imagine being out there on the pitch and you've got 22 in your squad and you said to them, right, if you drop that pass, I'm going to give you a yellow card. If you drop a second pass, you're off the game. That's not going to improve them.
No.
That's not going to get them to play better.
It's going to build pressure, isn't it?
100%. You're going to be thinking, if I drop this pass, I've got one more chance. Only if they said to you, if you miss a tackle, because that's worse, it's a straight red, you're off the pitch. How do you build a team in that context? Without giving them imagine the pressure we would have felt in that. You would have always felt like you were just one mistake away from being dropped. And that must be how it feels at times on certain construction sites. Now, the company that I work for, the work they're doing around mental health and how they're driving it is industry leading. We are really good at what we're doing. We're driving it forward. But I've worked with companies that I know are still out there that aren't that good, that still operate in a very fine margin, and unfortunately don't always have the time to be able to do that coaching and nurturing. But the industry that I work in, the company I work for at the moment, industry leading, looking after their staff, really are pushing the agenda towards improving mental fitness and mental health. You look at the courses that I've done with them on suicide prevention, mental health first aider, and other things like, a very simple one, as a young man, I know I'm not that young, but, you want to have a young family, and you go on paternity leave, what's the industry standard now, 2-3 weeks?
Yeah.
The company I work for give 12 weeks paid.
Wow.
Because the pressures as a young dad, I had my little boy, I had 2 weeks when he was born, paternity. You get the same for annual leave. And I put two weeks annual leave in at the same time, so I got 4 weeks with him, his first 4 weeks of his life. And then at the time, Laura and Thaddeus were up north and I was in London, so I was only getting to see him on the weekends as a young dad. And that I felt so guilty for the first year. That's why they moved down south with me. But I'm not alone in that. There's so many of the industry in construction that literally, they live up in Cumbria and they travel down to London for the work because that's where it is.
Yeah.
And that's one of the issues in construction. We're so transient. We're having to travel so far for work, and you don't get to see your families. You spend weeks, or as I did St Pancras train station in 2003, and I'd often go a month without coming back up north and seeing friends and family. That loss of connection again.
Yeah.
I was able to deal with that because I was used to that loss and that connection. But the lads I worked with were born and bred in Ellesmere Port. They weren't used to it, and it was clear to see the pressure on them. You could see them, when the excitement on a Friday at 11 o'clock when they know that they're going back home in that van. Different characters altogether, because they were going to go in, they were going to get that interaction, they were going to get that relationship with their family. That is, put all that, there's a big melting, boiling pot within the construction industry of issues. There's no one silver bullet that's going to sort it. There's loads of little things that we need to address and we need to face into. Fortunately, the companies that I work for at the moment, they are addressing that, they are facing into it, but the whole industry, and it's not just the construction, I think of construction as, it's like a barometer for male mental health. 99% of our workforce is men. So if you want to see how male society is getting on, you look at the construction industry and you'll see how we're performing, and it's not great. The statistics are horrible. I mean, you said you've got a statistic there for
82% of builders or people within the construction will experience mental health problems.
It's sad because it doesn't shock me. Yeah, it really is sad because it doesn't shock me. Site managers, I think, when I started looking to become a site manager with I've always had this in my head about moving towards project management, but when I did it, it was only after I finished my degree that I looked at it and I thought, what's it like as a job? What am I looking at? And it was actually the second most stressful job to do. Site manager is the second most stressful job to do in the world, behind stockbroker. Because at the time, the markets were up and down. The stockbrokers were, dying by suicide as a regular occurrence.
So what needs to change? I know you said that your industry are making big inroads, but what needs to change to improve that? And
Well,
also, not just construction-wise, I asked you one of the questions, where are men failing?
yeah.
What accountability do men need to take on that? You know, I'm talking about vulnerability there as well.
It's funny in your question that you asked, it was really good. I have a hang up on words, and you said, where are men failing? And I straight away, defensive side of me is like, men aren't failing. Let's just be clear on that. Men are not failing. Men are doing really well. In a modern world where, I mean, could you imagine being a young boy coming up through society nowadays with all the pressures of, you know, social media? As a kid growing up, like, I was never bothered what I looked like. I mean, I was a proper portly little fat kid, right? I was never bothered what I looked like. But could you imagine being a kid growing up nowadays, looking at that social media, having the same pressures that girls had when they were younger, looking at the magazines and all these fantastic, perfect women, and now lads have got exactly the same thing. Society hasn't addressed the issue around women. What we've done is we've made it worse by making it and applying it to men now, that men have got to be this certain way. And then you put all this, you know, it only takes one video on Snapchat or Instagram or one thing, and your life could be ruined because you've done something silly when you're a kid, and being a young boy growing up into those pressures, and then you see all this perfect world that's out there, and these young boys have got this expectation that they've got to be the perfect boy, they've got to get the perfect job, they've got to know what they want to do in life.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm 43 and I have no idea what I want to do with my life. You know, right now I'm a site manager working to potentially be a project manager. Well, actually, I quite like the idea of maybe running a coffee shop one day.
Oh,
You know,
be a cracking barista.
be awesome.
Knocker. Phenomenal latte out.
Yeah, exactly. That'd be a great job, wouldn't it? But I don't know if that's what I want to do in life. But these young boys, they're expected to know what they're going to do by the time they're 16, or what college they're going to go and study at, or what university they're going to study. How? How do you know all that? And all those pressures put into that. I mean, society's got a lot of things that it needs to address, but construction is a great barometer. It's that canary in the mines, isn't it? And right now that canary is sounding, and it's been sounding for decades, unfortunately. This is not new information about how the construction industry is performing, because there's reports that have been done for decades, Egan reports, you look at the new Building Safety Act around quality, all of these reports that have identified these issues that have been identified for over 30 years within the construction industry. We're too adversarial, you know, we competitively tender and push everything down to the finest of margins, puts loads and loads of pressure, and there's better ways of doing it. I don't know all of the answers to how that can be dealt with within the construction industry, and certainly not within society either, but there's little incremental steps that we can make to improve it. There's no one silver bullet. We can't solve it with just one, this is the answer, here's a pill, take that. It's not COVID-19 where you can get immunised for it. It's not something that you can just, you know, deal with after, you know, a little bit of medication. Certainly if we had the response like we had to COVID-19, like we do to, and had that to mental health, not just for men, but for society as a whole, and said, look, we've got a pandemic here, and it's not just our country, there's a pandemic around mental health taking place. If we actually looked at that in the same sense that we did with COVID-19 and saying people are dying at an alarming rate, and we need to do something to actually address this, then we could actually get a response that would be adequate.
It's mad that you bang on there. Anxiety was never mentioned when we were kids, or even when we were playing rugby. It wasn't mentioned, but now you've got Pixar, Inside Out 2, and one of the characters is actually anxiety.
Yeah.
And it's mad, isn't it? And one of them's it's a French ennui.
Yeah.
Generally, like just, boredom, like just not bothered.
Yeah.
Which for us is like probably a fixed mindset, doing the same thing every day and not like pushing yourselves. But I bet you're learning more about yourself and you're developing your emotional intelligence as you're trying to nurture that in your boy.
Yeah. Oh, becoming a father. It sounds like something that you've heard all your life, but it is life-changing. It is life-changing. And you should know, like, why would I be shocked by that? But I look back at the person I am. I mean, my little, you know, like, Thaddeus has only seen me play rugby a handful of times down south after, you know, many retirements. And I'm grateful for that he won't see that there's a certain side of me that I'm grateful he'll never see. Because
Why?
Because I wouldn't want him, much like my father, and I imagine, and I'm only assuming how my dad feels, is that I know my dad has got very dark demons that he does not want me to ever bear witness to or even hear about. And I wouldn't want my son to, very much the same, I wouldn't want my son to see my demons. And because it's that protective paternal side of you, you want to protect your family from that. Sorry, when I say son, I should say sons, because there will be one early next year, hopefully.
I'm glad you're pushing with that. I remember you saying you were thinking about adoption.
Yeah.
Ages ago, years ago, and it must have been because we haven't spoke together for years. I remember you saying, I don't know where we were. We must have been here, but I remember you saying you were thinking about adoption.
Yeah. Always, it's always been something I've always wanted to do, and we are now in a fortunate position where, financially and family-wise we're settled, and that we can do that, and we are that close. We are moving forward with a young boy now who we met with the Flintshire County, the Flintshire Local Authority have been really good over the past year, working with them, and they're now working with the social workers around this young boy who, I talk about my dark side and why I don't want Thaddeus to see what I was like in certain. So, there's some times out there where I'd thrive, and I want him to be able to see that and understand that. But there was parts of me where, they just weren't a nice person, and maybe him seeing that would understand how you develop as a person and understand that he'll go through those dark times, and it's okay to go through those dark times because you can come out of it. But this little boy that we're moving forward with, he's only 5, and unfortunately for that young boy, he's seen things that you and I will, even as grown adults, will go to our graves and never experience what that little boy's gone through. And horrible things for him to go through, and just traumatic, completely traumatic. And if my little boy, that's a separate one, that trauma that they've gone through, I want to be the person who can help nurture that child. But for my son to see certain ways that I behaved out there on the pitch, and I know it's only a game of rugby, but I give you an example. There was a time when we were out there playing, I think it was Preston Grasshoppers, and their second row come in being real antsy and real horrible, and twice my size, as most people are, and I was thinking, I'm just going to have to deal with this guy. And I punched him clearly, just clear, outright, without kind of too much instigation, in his throat, just aimed for it and hit it perfectly, and took him out of the game. And he had to get taken off because he couldn't breathe. Any other day, that could have seriously maimed that lad. And we were just playing a game of rugby. We were just playing 80 minutes of rugby, but my instinct was there was this threat in front of me, and I dealt with it in the way that instinctively I felt best. And I never got seen. There's only one person within this club that's ever seen that, and I won't mention his name because he always says to me how great it was, and it was one of his greatest memories of me, but it's one of my darkest memories because it sits there in my head, and I think to myself, if my little boy had seen that, he'd then go and repeat that behaviour. And if he said to me, why did you do it? The answer would be, because it was instinct, son. It was the way I was, raised, I saw a threat and I dealt with it. It's completely the wrong way to deal with it. And I wouldn't want him to think that that's the right way to deal with things in life. It was, it was wrong on many levels,
But not many people would be sitting in this chair and reflect on that in that way. A lot of people would not talk about it, would maybe boast about it. In your ability to now reflect back on that and say, that could have went really the other way.
Yeah.
What does that tell you?
There's growth there, emotional
intelligence, growth.
There's growth.
Awareness.
There's growth. Don't get me wrong. Get me a few pints when and I'm thinking I'd sit there and I'd regale about the times where I've hit people and put massive tackles in, and there's times where we've had proper to-dos and that. I think it's important to have that. Like I say, you've got to have that balance of where you can still. I don't want people to feel awkward around me when they say, "Oh, that time when you did that." I get the humour around it. I get that people can look back and laugh at that and go, "Yeah, wow."
But also not justifying that was a very different time. There wasn't officials watching it. There was a lot of stuff that happened that no one would see.
Yeah.
It's not now. You'll play a game out there and there'll be cameras. It'll be both officials are mic'd up watching games. And we're talking about when we were playing first team level. It's different now. You could get away with stuff. And you said before about shooing people. I can reflect back now on times where we could stamp on people and ruck them out back then. And some of it was horrendous, very close to people's heads. And I can think back as a scrum half and they were really not proud looking back. But actually, it was where I got the biggest enjoyment from playing the game, because skinny lad that would really struggle, but on there you would have opportunities where you could dominate people and you could feel like that, and that's the reality. Back then it wasn't right, but we could do it and everyone was doing it, and it was a part of the game, and it was survival, and survival was a big part of it. And that's probably why we had such a strong brotherhood and we create so strong friendships with people, because there is an element of, like back then, now it's flipping heck, there's someone being on it hoovering that. It's a 4G pitch. Back when we played, it was like a bloody swamp. It was, you don't need a shower after the game now. You can just have a wet wipe. The game is so different. But I'll also flip that back to you, as you were saying that. I also remember playing with you, and I know you were talking about footprints before, and you're very conscious about the footprint you want to leave. I know outside of rugby, through lads that I've played with and you're friends with, you support a lot of your friends at the moment going through tough times. They always say that you're there as a friend. I know people hold you in really high regard as a friend, as a person that will be there to support. You said you support an old fellow who lives by you, there's obviously there's a real element of support, and you help a lot of people, men, women, whatever. The lad that's going to be so lucky to come into your family, and you're going to help nurture and guide. And I also remember plenty of times out there where if people were getting dominated, you were the one that would jump in and save people. You were the one that, when everyone was shitting themselves, saying, "Let's have a do here, we can do this," you would lead from the front. So when you talk about footprints, well, how does that feel, me saying that before I even go into a question?
Really awkward. really, really awkward.
Why?
And uncomfortable.
Why?
I don't know. Do you know?
Because you have this, and the reason I'm saying that, when you were saying you were coming to that club, you were here 2 weeks ago, what was the response you saw from people when you came through the door?
It was really positive, yeah.
But your outlook is what?
Yeah, I know. I'm really anxious around interactions and that, but
That overthinking.
100%. And I know that's my nature, but I'm the type of person, like, I really don't enjoy my birthday and Christmas. I love Christmas now because of my little boy and his reaction. But the reasons why I hate my birthday and I hate Christmas, not hate, that's a really strong word, that. I find them really uncomfortable because I hate receiving gifts. So
Compliments.
Yeah, I do. I find it really difficult. And I don't know why it's there. But, people give me a gift, like, my mother-in-law, she's fantastic. Yeah, really nice lady. And every year she'll buy me a Christmas present. And, my two mother-in-laws actually are really good. Not that I've got two wives, just to clarify. just to clarify that, yeah. So my wife's got her mum and her stepmom.
Right.
And they're fantastic women. And they always buy me a gift every year, and I always receive it. And I've never explained it to them, but they must find me quite ignorant again and almost unappreciative, because I get that gift, oh, thanks very much, and I never open it. I find it really uncomfortable to open presents in front of people and receive, because I don't know if it's because I don't know how to react. I don't know if it's because I don't know, oh, is my reaction good enough? I don't know, am I being right in the amount of, gratitude I'm showing, or am I not? I find those situations and the compliments really uncomfortable to take, because there's part of me that thinks in my head that, are people thinking that I'm doing things so that I can get those compliments, or do they think I'm doing things so I can get those gifts? And I don't. I don't do things consciously to try and be a good person. I don't do things consciously because there's a legacy or a footprint I want to leave behind. I just want to be a nice person. I just want to be a good person. I think I am, and I say this all the time when people meet me, I am the most fortunate person that I know. I have the most beautiful and loving wife and family. I have a really good job. I have a really good employer. I have fantastic friends around me. How I got that, I don't know. And I'm so fortunate to have that I just want to be a nice person. And not because of I want to leave something behind or something, but I suppose part of it is, as a kid growing up, seeing my dad suffer so much pain as a soldier, seeing those people in Northern Ireland really suffering. The world can be such a horrible place at times that it just needs somebody to be, nice and kind, and I think there's part of me that just wants to be that kind person, that nice person, which is a battle, because I've always got that disciplined, firm person that's always there trying to, and that aggression that's come from those upbringings, and it's hard to always try and balance them. It's got easier as I got older to try and balance that out. And yeah, I suppose the compliments are really awkward, because I much enjoy giving out compliments. I much enjoy seeing people thrive. I find it, I get more enjoyment from life seeing people do well than I do from myself doing well, if that makes sense. I really, when I'm in work and I see people perform and do something that I think, wow, that's incredible, that's really good. That gives me more joy than when I go out and do something well. And don't get me wrong, I really enjoy it. When I do something and I nail it, I am so happy. I'm like, I nailed that one, But then when I see somebody else do it, that's within my team, that's worked towards that, I feel just this immense kind of wow. And I get more emotional over seeing other people achieve than myself. But then when somebody points out how well I've done, I'm quick to skirt over it and try and point out how well other people have done, because I just find it really uncomfortable and awkward.
That's interesting when you were saying about that coach you had before, that Jeff
Burdett
put that arm around you and said, he also said, well done. He recognised that you'd put yourself back in that position.
Yeah.
I suppose there's a lot to be said from a leadership perspective there in the construction world. How can we do a little bit more of that? How can we kind of praise, reward people and just give that support to people who were going through who were in a really tricky working environment with shitload of pressures?
Yeah. I mean, it's something that should be natural in leadership, in putting that arm on around, being that nurturing and that leader that shows vulnerability, shows their own weaknesses, and not as a way of showing that they're weak on it, but showing that they are vulnerable, and that helps engage people. But again, it's a very male dominated industry, and there's a lot of kind of this shoulders back, chest out, and stand upright, and this kind of male culture that's around there that can be seen as toxic. I don't always necessarily think that standing upright and pulling your shoulders out is a toxic display, by the way. I think that's actually it's a good way of bringing out a positive body image and leadership skills as well. But how do we improve leadership? The industry is doing a lot of work on that. I know certainly within my organisation now, they've actually got me on a leadership course to teach you about how to be a good leader, because I'm a manager, and there's a very big difference between a manager and a leader. A manager is a position, a leadership or a leader is actually a skill. It's a trait, it's a personality, and you can be a manager, but you could be a poor leader. You could be a leader, but be really poor at managing. Understanding the two and how they actually intertwine is critical, and there's ways of learning that. I don't believe people say, he's a natural leader, he's a natural man manager, or she's a natural leader, she's a natural man manager. I don't believe that. I think that is a skill that is developed. You don't get born and suddenly become this natural gifted person. It takes years of learning, and the industry from the bottom up within construction has a lot to do around our training. Whether it's training our skills, because our trades need to have proper apprenticeships brought back in and focused on that, because that in itself is a leadership trait. Investing in your people, investing in the industry and its operatives at the ground, and bringing in proper apprenticeships. Don't get me wrong, I'm not debunking and saying that MVQs aren't quality, because some of them are quality, but a qualification that actually gives you a theory and a practical based system that actually brings in proper skills with proper qualifications that really do provide a good level of training, not just a on-site learning, because we bring in MVQs in on construction that is taught from your grandfather or the person before you. You can't guarantee that person's been trained properly. And then we have the same in management and leadership in construction. Most people progress in construction because the company pushes them down a certain avenue, which is where the culture is. I've gone from a tradesperson to a supervisor to a foreman to an assistant manager to a site manager. I went a different path because I studied a little bit later in life. But there's this kind of route that you go through, and there's no focus on leadership. This company that I work for now has actually recognised that, and they're going, no, we need to teach people leadership skills. And I don't think you need that taught just at a management level. Certainly society, those leadership skills, those things, those traits, we should be teaching our kids at school. We should be teaching how to show vulnerability. It's not just a sign of weakness, it's a way of people actually being able to, empathise and understand each other. We can look at each other and, see that if you're vulnerable with me, it's not an opportunity for me to attack, it's actually an opportunity for me to engage and understand.
Bang on.
That vulnerability is not a sign of weakness, it's actually a sign of strength. It's really difficult in construction to show vulnerability because it's so contractual, it's so adversarial. And I said before that when you asked those questions and I wrote them down, I have shown vulnerability. As a young manager coming through, I was vulnerable and I showed that vulnerability and it was used against me. And so it made it very difficult for me to re-show that vulnerability to people again. And so it's, as a society, when people are vulnerable with us, not taking that and using that as an advantage, but using that for what it is as an opportunity to engage with people.
It's a gift.
Yeah.
It's a gift to have an open, honest conversation.
Yeah.
And it's the mass coming down 2 or 3 inches in there.
Yeah. I mean, you asked
which
about...
is emotional intelligence.
Yeah. You asked about... what is it? Worm of wisdom? And it all links into that. I don't have, this one little tidbit or thing that's going to sort out anybody's life. But there's always one thing that's always a reoccurring theme that's gone through my life. And again, the men in my life have reiterated this back to me. My granddad, when talking about relationships and how you try and identify a partner, spoke about this. My father-in-law, my wife's dad, spoke about this in a time where I was in a bit of turmoil and I was really struggling with it. And my dad constantly would talk about this. He would find it difficult, but for me, trust. Everything in life is ran on trust. People all say money, people all say love, trust is everything. When you go out there and you cross that road, you trust that the car coming down the road is going to brake to let you get across that. That was the phrase that my father-in-law used for me, and he said, that's trust. You trust everybody in society, whether you understand it or not. People will say that love's more important. Before you love somebody, you have trust. A simple thing like you arrange a date on your first date, you've got to trust that they're going to turn up. And you're going to trust that they're going to be there with you for that date. That little bit of trust when they turn up and they're there, that's the foundation that your love builds on. You know, the financial world, how many times do we see it collapse? Yeah, because we lose confidence in how people are making payments back because we've trusted that people are going to responsibly lend money when that trust has failed. You know, yeah, that little worm of wisdom for me is trust. Trust is everything. It's hard to build. It's hard to develop. It's easily taken away. And I don't believe when people say, once you've lost the trust, that's it. I don't believe that. And I know that because I've lost trust in my relationships. And I've been not a great person at times. And I've worked hard to get that trust and build that trust back. And that is not just an emphasis on the person who's lost that trust. It's on the person who is expected to receive that trust.
Yeah.
It's got to be a two-way street. You know, you can lose trust with somebody, but you can also, if you want it, you can build that trust back. And often that trust that you build back can be stronger than the initial trust that you had.
Because you're tighter.
That to me, and it's the same with the construction industry, it's the same around mental health. You know, vulnerability. You know, if I show vulnerability to you, I've got to trust that you're not going to use that against me. And then if you show it to me, you've got to trust likewise that I'm not going to use it against you. And there is that trust. It's what makes the world go round.
And that's why trust and vulnerability are so connected.
Oh yeah.
Because if we've lost it, I've got to be vulnerable and give that back to you to give you that second chance. Or if you don't give the second chance, how do you have an opportunity to put it right?
Yeah.
Nath, you said before about how fortunate you were. You missed one thing off. You've got hair. Mate, smashed it. Thanks so much for your time.
Cheers, mate.
And honestly, I've thoroughly enjoyed this, and I feel like I've seen a bit of a different version of you.
Thanks, mate.
So thanks for being so open, honest, and articulate. Cheers, pal.
No, thank you.
I hope you enjoyed Tackling It Together, brought to you by Little Black Bird. If you did, then please hit the subscribe button. Give us a follow on our socials, Little Black Bird Limited. Also, please give us a like and comments on any thoughts that you may have. Let's get these important topics out there and encourage some meaningful, authentic conversations. See you next time. Cheers, and remember, keep smiling.